Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It is kind of late and it's a cold night, so it's even more important that we're together and sharing this warm conversation. My name is Shirin Khosropur. I'm a psychology professor at ACC. I'm also the director of the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies, and that's the center from which we sponsor this film series, Cinema of Conflict and Transformation. I'm also the department chair for interdisciplinary studies. Interdisciplinary studies at ACC offers 5 different degree programs. Those degrees include, and as of this year, we have a new degree program we're launching. That's a degree in interdisciplinary studies, African and African diaspora studies. A second degree in interdisciplinary studies is American studies. Another is global studies, Mexican American studies, and the 5th is peace and conflict studies. So if you want to know more about any of these degrees, please feel free to contact me or contact Layla. I'm going to introduce our 2 discussants tonight, starting with Dr. Mark Cunningham, who is coordinating this entire film series with us at the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies, and sort of curating the whole thing. Dr. Mark Cunningham, as many of you know, is a professor in radio, television, film at ACC. He received his PhD in RTF from UT at Austin. He has contributed essays to national publications, several anthologies, and peer-reviewed journals focusing on such topics in film and television media studies as John Singleton's film Poetic Justice, Spike Lee's semi-autobiographical film Crooklyn, Ice-T's role on Law and Order SVU, alternative spaces of Blackness in Barry Jenkins' debut film, Medicine for Melancholy, and the importance of Black popular culture. He's also presented papers at national conferences and community events and participated in both media and education-related panel discussions. Dr. Cunningham is currently writing a book on race, gender, and narrative in the trilogy of films about South Central LA, written and directed by the late John Singleton, to be published by Columbia University Press. And his favorite film is Boys in the Hood. Our discussant tonight is Dr. Khayree Williams, and he's the director of ACC's Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Campus Center, or TRHT. As the director of this center, Dr. Williams is responsible for relationship building and facilitating ongoing conversations in the community about changing the racial narrative, both at ACC and in Central Texas. The goal of the TRHT Center is to create a community where race, ethnicity, and other human differences are no longer predictors of success and well-being. Instead, we want to work together to eliminate barriers in policies, practices, attitudes, and cultural messages that reinforce these differential outcomes by race. Dr. Williams has served underrepresented students at colleges and universities for more than a decade. He earned a bachelor's degree in human resource management and a master's degree in college student affairs and leadership from Grand Valley State University. And he recently completed his doctorate of community college leadership from Ferris State University. So congratulations on that, Dr. Williams. And his favorite film is Menace to Society, which I have yet to see. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Mark Cunningham.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope everybody had a chance to watch The Murder of Fred Hampton, which is a documentary that was done in 1971 by a group of filmmakers who referred to themselves as the Film Group, and really sought to chronicle the chairman, as they call him, Chairman Fred Hampton's life. Hampton was a member of the Black Panther Party that was based in the Chicago area. As you know, the Black Panther Party, at the peak of its operation, was spread all over the United States for sure. Anyway, so the guys that were making this movie again, tried to kind of sought to chronicle Fred Hampton's life and ended up chronicling the last 9 months of his life. Fred Hampton was murdered by the Chicago police, led by the attorney general at the time, by a guy by the name of Edward Hanrahan, and would not, for some decades later, I think well into the 90s, would it be found that he was in fact murdered, and then reparations in that regard were made to kind of right that wrong, so to speak. One of the ways that Hanrahan and the police were able to do this is that they coerced a young Black man by the name of William O'Neill to work as an FBI informant. And the way that they did it is that O'Neill himself was in a lot of trouble with the law, and so they said, basically, we will wipe your slate clean, and if you do this. And so O'Neill, thinking like, hey, I don't have to go to jail, basically infiltrate, so to speak, the Black Panther Party, gets kind of really close to the operations, gets close to Fred Hampton himself, and basically informs the FBI of Hampton's every move. And this is how they knew when to attack. And they attacked in the early morning hours on a cold day, interestingly enough, in December the 3rd, to be December the 4th, around that time, early that morning. About 4 o'clock in the morning, a heavily armed police kind of burst into where not only Hampton was living with his pregnant girlfriend, but there were other members of the Black Panther Party that were present, and they were all asleep. And they get really around about 4:45 in particular. They go into the apartment. One of the Black Panthers, a guy by the name of Mark Clark, was standing guard. They immediately shoot him in the heart and kill him. They go through the house, kind of take everybody out of rooms and kind of move everything around, and then end up going into a bedroom and shooting Fred Hampton in the back of the head a few times while he slept, and proceeded to say, oh, they shot at us, all this other stuff was happening. And so they go into this space after a while, take what they need out of this space, and then the Panthers themselves take people in the neighborhood on a tour to basically show them exactly what happened, which, as you all saw, is documented in the film. So it is there's actually a movie that's coming out about that case called The Judas and the Messiah, which is about Fred Hampton and William O'Neill, with Daniel Kaluuya and Lakeith Stanfield. And if you've seen the trailer is incendiary. It's fabulous. If a trailer alone is an indication of how good this movie, I hope the movie lives up to the hype of this trailer. But anyway, so that gives you a little bit of background on what we're talking about here today. So I wanted to converse with Dr. Williams, and you as well too, just some questions that I, kind of set the discussion of what we want to talk about here today in reference to the Black Panthers. So,
yes, sir. Did you show him your sweater?
I did not. Yes, I'm wearing
your hoodie?
my People's Free Food Program. The kind of, this is where the Black Panthers, as you all know, fed, and as they show in the documentary, them had the breakfast program to feed, underprivileged youth in the neighborhoods and whatever else. I mean, and, as we know, what's really interesting about the Black Panthers themselves, right, is, they were created by, the Black Panthers itself, right, was created by, a couple of college students, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, in 1966, in Oakland, California, right? And, Cornel West, the great scholar Cornel West, describes the party really as, and I quote, one of the founding as one of the great moments in the struggle for Black freedom and deep democracy in the United States. And, a lot of people saw them as violent, saw them as a threat, because these brothers didn't back down, and they would arm themselves, and they, but what's very, very interesting is, the good of what they did in these neighborhoods, in these kind of urban spaces, these urban milieux, was largely overlooked because of the threat that they seemed to pose to the power structures, and so it's quite interesting how that goes about, for sure. So, Dr. Williams, ready for me to throw the first question at you?
I think so. I'm
You
excited.
ready? All right, let's get rolling. So the first thing I want to start by asking you is, first of all, even currently today, right, the name Black Panthers automatically kind of elicits certain feelings in people. I think without even knowing exactly what the Black Panthers about already, or what the Black Panthers are about, already have an idea in their head, a lot of times based on media, about how they feel, what they feel about this organization. So what do you think of when you hear the Black Panthers? And why do you think that even today, the very mention of the name Black Panthers brings up thoughts of violence and terrorism and racism for so many people?
Wow. Yeah. Awesome question. For me, I think power to the people. I think solidarity against oppression, police brutality, injustice, being left out in terms of our voices and our presence and policies and practices. I think Black and brown people, taking care of Black and brown people, protecting our communities, providing programs for like the lunch program you mentioned, programs around medical health or health and medical services, programs around economic empowerment. It was Black people saying that we are proud of being Black and we're not going to be afraid anymore, and we're going to take care of our communities. And it was having a spirit of not being fearful and being leaders and just protecting our communities and trying to uplift them, especially for the next generation. And I think why that's not the dominant message, I don't think it's on purpose. I think that the narrative has been created intentionally for us to fear that group and groups like it. And I think it was on purpose. I think if you think about what we know about how Dr. Martin Luther King, who we beloved now for his nonviolent kind of approach, like he was constantly under surveillance of the FBI. Yes. We love him, right? We believe that he was doing some positive things, but that wasn't always the case. Malcolm X was constantly under FBI and CIA surveillance. So I think that the power structure, or those that view these groups as being a threat to the power structure, made them nervous, made them anxious, that crafted a narrative that would make us nervous or scared or afraid of organizations like the Black Panther. And I think that even in 2020, we see that now as it relates to how Black Lives Matter movement is characterized. And are there some individuals in the movement that were potentially problematic? I think we can have that conversation, but I don't think that there was most of the movement. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's where something else that is to mention about that, right, too, is the what I call the youthful energy, right, that is on display with the Black Panthers. I mean, these are young college students, and this is something I talk to my students about. It very much so reminds me of the very last part of Kendrick Lamar's "To Pimp a Butterfly" CD, and he has that conversation between he and Tupac at the end. Of course, it's been kind of interpolated from another actual interview, right? A European interview, as I'm sure you're aware, that Pac had. But I always think about that moment of that interview, if you will, where Pac makes that comment that when you're young, right, that's when you're loud. And you want to lift weights, and you want to get out there and fight, and you want to be out there in the struggle. He says, when you look around, you get about 30, he said, you don't see no loud 30-year-old people. You start to kind of temper.
Listen, we got mortgages. We try. We
tired. It's even like now I hear, former students of mine, whatever, oh, Dr. Cunningham, are you going to come out here and distress? I'm too old to be out in the street. That's for y'all to do. I say, I hit it. I donate to the Equal Justice Initiative. I do things. Absolutely. I hit it with my pocketbook now. I can't be out there getting arrested at the stage. What happened? And but I think it speaks to the way, right, that there are so many different ways, right, to contribute to the battle or to contribute to the fight. And and I think also too with the Black Panthers too, it really shows. I mean, think about all of the pictures that we see of them, right? And it's always them in these kind of aggressive stances, right? But but one of the things I love very much about the documentary is to see them in the space feeding the children, which I think belies a lot of these kind of stances of them with with guns in their hand and the black berets and stuff, which is certainly a part of that uniform that they wore.
Right.
But the care, right, in them, who wants milk? You can have as much milk as you want to. You can eat,
Right.
who wants some more food? And it was just the joy in that, and calling them, the uplift that we saw there, calling them little brothers and little sisters and all that. And it is amazing. And what, what's also kind of what's interesting about that too as well, and that people don't understand too, is that they were not just black and brown children that were being fed. A lot of underprivileged white children were being fed. They didn't turn anybody away.
Right.
And that gets lost so often in this discussion, because like you said, I think the preferred message is to talk about them as these violent, menacing structures in our culture.
Or even now, the radical left. We hear the radical left, radical left. Yeah. But I think also it's not only was the narrative intentionally crafted, but it's also left out. Like if we learned about some of these positive traits in our history books, then we would understand that they were a complex organization that was doing many positive things. But we just aren't receiving the education. We have to dig for stuff like that. Right.
If the chosen oppressed no longer want to be oppressed and find out they don't have to be, then who is there to rule over? Right. I mean, it very much so works in that respect for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. So if I can steal the name of your organization with the college, sir, in this next question. So when we think about the visual evidence, I've heard so many people say it, it's so true, right? Everybody is acting now like all of these beatings and all of this kind of police brutality and such, these kind of racist acts that are being caught on video. People act like all of these things are new. When in fact these things are not new, they're just being recorded now. So we have visual evidence, right? And I think one of the first ways, one of the more pronounced ways that we've had that visual evidence, or where we started to see the effect of it or the lack of effect, is with the Rodney King incident. That nobody thought that those police officers going in on Rodney King had no idea that they were being recorded. And so when we have this visual evidence, of what happened to Rodney King, seeing Eric Garner be choked out on the streets of New York, watching George Floyd, for almost 10 minutes, have the life taken from him, and countless other incidents that we have evidence of. Why do you think the idea of truth, racial healing, and transformation, why are those things, and these are things that Fred Hampton espoused in so many of his speeches and so many of his commentaries, why do you think that remains so difficult for people to grasp? And you can see the injustice. You have visual evidence in addition to written evidence of these injustices. Why does the idea of truth, racial healing, transformation, why does that remain difficult for people to grasp?
Wow. Yeah, so I'm born and raised in Flint, Michigan, and I live in Austin now. Upper middle class. I'm working an amazing job. I'm finally making a good living for myself. I have this beautiful house. I have some great things. But every holiday I go back to visit my parents. I walk in my parents' house and I walk through the kitchen. The first thing I see in one of the corners is a stack of bottled water. I look to the right and I see a water filter on my parents' kitchen sink. And it's a quick reminder that, we still have it's been going on for 6 years. So having grown up in that community, a community that's really pretty much been ravaged by just kind of lack of jobs and all the problems that flow from that. So crime and school systems losing money, tax base leaving. I've seen and lived in a community where systematic racism is a real thing, and I understand it. It is my lived experience. And I think for some or those that just don't have that experience, it's hard for them to make the connection that it's a real thing. So even in seeing a video clip, I think it's very easy to go to, well, maybe there's more to the story, or maybe he did something else that we didn't see, or maybe this, or maybe that. I think there's and I worked in higher ed for almost half of my professional career, so I have some amazing relationships with law enforcement officers, and I know that there are some great law enforcement officers, and I don't believe that most are bad, but I do believe that there's a problem. and being a person of color, growing up in that. When I got my first car at 17, having to have that conversation with my parents about how I react when I'm pulled over by the police, because I will be pulled over. This is just so much a part of my lived experience, and even as a professional, I've still had negative experiences. That it's not hard for me to understand that there's an issue. When that's not your lived experience, I can see where the disconnect comes. I also think it's a little bit deeper than that. I think to admit that there's a problem in some respects means that you're admitting that you've been complicit in it because you haven't did anything about it. So either you've been complicit in it, or at the very least you haven't did anything about it. And if you are to admit that there's a problem, then now you have to do something about it. So I think that there's some guilt that comes with that, and there's some angst that comes with that. And so I think people fight it because they don't want to have to own all that stuff, and it's heavy. So I think it's all of that.
Right. And I think even when you were saying too, as well, about, about where there's got to be more to the story, right? And like you said, I think that people construct their own narratives too, based on their experience with a group of people, or their lack of experience with a group of people, right? And I think, and as a media person myself, I'm not big on laying everything at the feet of media, but I do think that media does present certain messages, right? And people take those messages and run with them. And what, some of the things, I teach my students about a process that's called symbolic annihilation, right? And with symbolic annihilation, right, it's the idea that, well, we can't remove you from the real world or real life or culture per se, but here's what we'll do. We'll eliminate your existence in media, right? And so we'll either do it by not acknowledging your presence at all, or we will put you there and we won't say anything about you. And so it's another way of silencing, right, a group of people. And so when you're relying on media messages, right, to give you context, or that's been your education about people of color, which, there's so many examples, and we can talk all night about how those examples have been warped for sure, then I think there's a lack of empathy that happens on that, in that regard too, that you would still ask the question after watching somebody being choked out, right? Well, something else must have happened. And I think it really does kind of, I think documentaries like this really kind of connect with something that Spike Lee does in his movie Do the Right Thing, where he very much so points out by the end of that film that there is this preference, if you will, or there is this concern, I should say, not preference, but concern over property value versus human life. And I think we see that so much even now, right, with the riots and looting and what have you, and people are so concerned about the loss of this property and the destruction of property, and they're not giving any regard whatsoever to the loss of human life. But it just kind of shows, right, what lives are valued. Yeah. Right. That even in Fred Hampton's case, right, that you could go into his place, his residence while he's sleeping, shoot him in the back of the head as if it was nothing, and then carry his body out with laughing and grins on your face while he's in a body bag, that kind of thing. Yeah. And I think also there's a little bit of somewhat of a disconnect. And what I mean by that is I taught a freshman seminar course last year. So these are 17 and 18-year-olds. And I'm 40, and we were watching, I showed Higher Learning because they wanted to watch a movie that had a lot of issues in it, and it was complex. And we got to talking, we got on the conversation of police brutality, and I mentioned Rodney King, like you just referenced earlier, and they all looked at me and said, "Who's Rodney King?" Yeah. And it just struck me that, yeah, this happened before they were born, or before they were born, or that they were very young kids. And for some, and for many, they don't even realize that this has been going on for ages. This is not a new problem. This is not a new concern. We're not frustrated because it just started happening in 2019, 2020. This has been a thing for as long as we can remember, and people are frustrated because there hasn't been any movement on it. Exactly. This is, I tell my students as in teaching Do the Right Thing, I say all the time that, Spike Lee makes this movie 30 years ago, and all we've done is exchange one set of names for a new set of names. Absolutely. And you're right. It's just by generation. It's so interesting for sure. Yeah, I saw some kid with Penny. Yeah. That's true. Oh yes, Anna Devere Smith's Twilight Los Angeles. Yeah, I mean, where she specifically went into those spaces during the Rodney King riots and interviewed people of all walks of life and performs these perspectives, this kind of ethnographic work that she does there. Yeah, I'm a huge fan, Professor Barfield, of Twilight Los Angeles, and same thing's true what she does with Crown Heights, New York, when Fire's in the Mirror, which I'm also a huge fan of. Yeah, I'm glad you're teaching that, Professor Barfield. So I want to shift gears a little bit,
okay,
and talk about something I think that has long been a part of movements like the Black Panthers, and we hear Fred Hampton specifically mention this in his speeches in the documentary. So we know that he and the Black Panthers and other organizations like it championed the idea of socialism in America.
Yeah.
Okay, and there's a lot of conversation right now being had about socialism, right, which is connected to things like defunding the police and kind of defunding these governmental structures and healthcare for all and such. Can that construct, Dr. Williams, truly work in an America that is kind of deeply rooted in the practices and throes of capitalism? Can socialism really work in this culture?
You know, I struggle with this question. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I don't know a person, Black, brown, white, or otherwise, who received that $1,200 stimulus check and sent it back. I don't. But then there are some strong feelings against what we call socialism, even though many of the systems we all benefit from are a product of it. And as I think about just the time we're in, where there are people that are literally don't know where their next meal is coming, or don't know how they're going to cover their rent or their mortgage, or are just concerned about enough food for their kids, then there's people like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, who have increased their billions by 30 or 40%. So as I think about the healthcare system, one of the things he talked about in the movie was private wealth over public health. And I think the way our systems are structured, the pharmacy, the private pharmacies, the hospitals, the insurance companies, they benefit by keeping money, by providing less coverage, by charging as much as they can for medications. So I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I believe it can work, but I don't know that it will work, because there's such strong interest in capitalism and wealth, and there being kind of the haves and have-nots, so to speak. And some people truly view it as a pie, a piece of pie, or a large pie. And if I give up a little bit of mine, or essentially I have to give up a little bit of my pie so you can have some. Why should I give up some of my pie? And I truly believe that equity and social justice shouldn't be viewed as a pie. I feel like we can and should all have an equal shot at this, whatever we view this American dream as being for us. But I don't think that's the case presently.
Yeah, just really quick before I kind of speak on what you just said, but to answer a few questions here. Jeff Harris asked, like, what happened to Reginald Denny? Reginald Denny was the truck driver that unfortunately got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, if you will, trying to drive through an area in South Central Los Angeles, had nothing to do with anything that was going on, and was beaten pretty mercilessly by a group of angry protesters. You asked what happened to him. Reginald Denny tried to sue the city of Los Angeles and was unsuccessful in doing so, and really moved to Arizona, and this just stays out of the media context. He doesn't talk about that day at all. So he's just kind of retreated into a quiet private life, for sure, in that regard, just to kind of address that question. Chip, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so to both of you professors, I hate to go somewhere which is trivial compared to some of the things you're talking about, but what I was intrigued by, or one of the things I was intrigued by in the movie was, the Black police officers who were involved on the police side of things, and then in the congregation, if that's the right word, there were white faces listening to Hartman talking. And, you know, so I sort of wonder what's the mentality of the white people who go into that black church, and then what's the mentality of the black police officers who are standing next to the, you know, the white police officers during that melee?
You know, what's interesting about that, Chip, too, is that, I mean, if you think about the initial, meaning behind what Fred Hampton was trying to do. And the same thing is true of the Black Panthers in general. I mean, if you listen to one of the speeches that he even says, we want black power for black people, white power for white people, brown power for brown people. He goes, and so the idea really and he's the one that actually started the Rainbow Coalition, not Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson picked up the mantle from Fred Hampton. But Fred Hampton's goal, right, was to kind of bring these individuals together, not under the guise of race, but really about class. And kind of, so bringing all of these poor people in, right, to help everybody to get kind of on a level playing field, right? So, you know, governmental structures, police structures, whatever, were seen as the enemy of their group because those people were in such opposition to what they were trying to do. So the people who were sitting in those spaces, listening to Fred Hampton and following what he says, were truly supportive and behind, right, everything that he was doing, because again, from a class standpoint, he was speaking their language. They, you know, and the thing is that in those spaces, those white people understood that while there was a level ground, so to speak, or they certainly had common ground, I should say, where class is concerned, they understood and knew that race was another thing, and they knew that there were ways that, say, that Fred Hampton was being attacked that they weren't. They understood that. So these black police officers, and I've heard, you know, this gets said a lot about people in spaces like this, or people in urban spaces that are kind of talking about the police. This is, as long as the person might have black skin, but if they got on that blue uniform, they ain't no friend of ours, right? Because they're going to uphold that, whatever they're following orders, and whatever the order is, that's what they're going to follow.
Blue
and
wall.
it really does, huh?
The blue wall.
The blue wall, exactly. So it's like, you know, they might, you know what they say, all skin folk ain't kinfolk, kind of thing, for sure. Dr. Williams, you wanted to add to that?
No, I would just reference to the blue wall. I think, I think we need more police officers of all different variations of diversity, and that's a positive thing. But I think that when I say that there's a problem, I think that there's, implicit bias is a thing, racism is a thing, and having some conversations and some training around this needs to be, for me, and it needs to be a part of what every police officer does, regardless of what their demographic, what their diversity makeup is. So yes, I think there's problematic police officers, period.
And I think some of the things, I honestly believe, and this is my thoughts on it as well too, with police officers in this regard as well, is that I don't think every police officer out there inherently goes out there, we're gonna go out here and we're gonna arrest us some black and some brown people. Mm-hmm. I think what has happened is that they have learned that those are the bodies that you're supposed to have fear of. Mm-hmm. So they go out into these spaces policing with fear already in their heads about certain bodies, and certain and male bodies in particular. And so the black male body is already a space of fear. And so when you have that ingrained in your subconscious, that's how you attack that. That's how you treat it. You shoot first and ask questions later. And if you're that fearful, maybe that's not the job for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I would just add that I think I would encourage everyone, if you haven't taken it, to take the Harvard implicit bias test, because this is not a police issue. This is a human being issue. Mm-hmm. The problem is that police officers carry guns, and there's real ramifications when they make a mistake like that. But I truly believe that in the work I do, because I believe that this is an issue that we're all struggling with and need to continue to have conversations around and continue to develop ourselves around. We all have been impacted by biases, stereotypes, or all those different isms in different ways. And if we haven't worked through it, then there's a potential that you're making
more lives are going to be lost.
Absolutely.
For sure. Definitely. Joseph, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I want to go back to, I was in Berkeley when Stokely Carmichael and the Black Panthers came came forward, and what I would say is what the meaning of them to me is stand up. Stand up. I'm going to stand up for this community, and I'm going to stand up for all you people who aren't standing up. And they stood with their rifles on their shoulders, and they were disciplined, and they weren't there to scare you, because later on you get the gray Panthers, old people saying, hey, we're going to take that. We're going to, and I understand about, borrowing someone's culture, but and they did the same thing to the people in Maryland when they burnt that whole block out of Black Panthers. So Black Panthers were put down. In the 60s, you didn't see a white man brush his teeth on TV. You didn't see a white woman wash her clothes.
Yeah.
When was that going to happen? Well, it wasn't going to happen until finally it did. But the only image you saw in the late 60s, the 70s, were Black Panthers standing up and looking menacing, but they weren't menacing. I mean, that was strong energy. The strong woman standing up. And, I worked with Cesar Chavez and farm labor strike. And so that kind of, we were spit on, we were struck. That whole anti-movement, war movement of that, brothers going into the war that, get out of jail, doing all that. What I liked about the thing that you said earlier was that they were feeding the people. They were feeding everyone. They were educating, and what I liked when they were talking about, people were telling Fred about their projects, and he was saying, "Are you educating people? You got to educate people about this." And they were talking, this is revolution. You got to talk about what this is. Now, I think one of the reasons that people don't get behind, or they don't see this, is they have this capitalistic mentality of, I've got mine, now you get yours. I'm going to have. I have something. I can't lose it. I have so little and I get so little, I got to keep what I have. And if I go out in the street, I might get killed, but I don't want to lose it. And the Panthers was about relationship to the community, relationship to all the people. And I think that was what's important.
Yeah, and I think that gets lost in these narratives, right? And I mean, and I think that's, some of the benefit of this documentary too, is that it shows them in these different spaces. It's not just them, fighting against, the police or fighting against governmental structures. It's them working in the neighborhood. It's the work that they do. And I think that's such the benefit of this documentary, is that you get to see that work being done. And that's so important. So important. I agree, wholeheartedly agree with you on that.
And educating, I think that piece, what you're doing, and you're telling these young people, hey, there's something happening here. Like they said, the revolution won't be televised. Well, sometimes it was televised.
Yeah, sometimes it was, exactly.
And we see it now, and it scares people. Yeah. And it's like, hey, you come from a poor background. We're all in this together. It's not about black and white or yellow and brown. Thank you.
Yeah. Heather, did you want to ask the question?
Yeah, I'm just trying to unmute myself.
Okay.
This is great. Thank you. And thanks to the Peace and Conflict Studies Department that is always challenging me to stretch all of my intellectual background and learning and education. And my question was actually kind of sort of already brought up by, I guess, Joseph, and that's around education and that emphasis that that conversation around, for example, what's a credit union? What's a credit union? So I'm shifting it a little bit since it was already kind of brought up, and I want to bring up something new. I mean, yes, I definitely believe it starts with education, and the fact that I am a professor at a community college that is teaching mostly a marginalized and BIPOC community. My role as a white woman is to become an ally. And the more and more that I invest into the college and the more I invest into these students, especially during such turbulent times, it's really disruptive to kind of everything that I was taught when I was going for my doctorate. I mean, I was taught actually a lot of feminist politics, right? So I was under Dr. Jill Dolan at UT Austin and
Yeah, no
Charlotte
joke.
Canning. Yeah. So the concept of allyship has come up in my household a lot lately, especially with the Supreme Court justice situation. And the influence of the Black Panther movement on the feminist movement in the 70s is profound, as we all know. And of course, there's so much there's so much conversation on, white feminism appropriating what the Black Panthers did. And, truly, if we want to look into feminism, we should look into the Black feminist movement and the Black women that were part of the Panther movement, which is kind of more where sort of I'm directing my research right now. And so I'm sorry to say all of, I'm just trying to formulate my thought because
You're good. You're good.
it's really like this idea that, what is allyship today? What does that look like today? I mean, there's a lot of people that talk about this, and I need people in my life to really, especially when it comes to, wokeism and white supposed allies, what does that really look like? I feel like people are passing as allies. And this idea that to be an ally, you have to stand up even when you're scared. You have to stand up even when you're in a position of comfort and privilege. I know I have worked my butt off to get to where I am right now. And, even though I can say things may have been handed to me because of my privilege, and I acknowledge that, it was also really, really hard. And so there is this tension I feel, especially amongst white allies, in which they want to be recognized for all of the work that they do. And I'm so tired of it. I'm just like, just do the work, just do the work, just do the work. And so I guess my question is really, here I go. What does an ally mean today in 2020 under the circumstances that we're faced with? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Williams, you want to take? I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I actually just watched this movie. I don't know if you can see it. Maybe not that well.
Yeah, it's
Rosewood. I've seen it
Rosewood.
before, but I just watched it again.
Rosewood. Okay.
Rosewood. Yeah, Rosewood. I watched it
Okay.
again this week. I don't know why I was led to, because I knew it would make me upset. But the second kind of main character is a white guy. He's a shop owner that lives in the community of Rosewood, and he charges these absorbent interest rates, but he's a friendly white man. He's more friendly than the rest of the community. He does a host of other bad things, but at the end he does a little bit of positive. I don't know that it outweighs the negative. But I share that.
Played by John Voight of all people.
Yeah. Exactly. So I don't. For me, an ally is not a person who, when we're having a department meeting and something horrible goes wrong, and they pull me aside later and say that was pretty messed up, but they weren't willing to speak up in that meeting and stand beside me. Ally is not someone who is friendly with me, but when they're having conversations with their friends and their family, they allow racist jokes or insensitive things to occur, but they don't challenge them. Ally to me is someone who will stand next to me when there are things that happen that affect me that they know aren't wrong. So I don't know. I mean, that's for me. It's someone that's willing to risk it a little bit, to stand with me, stand next to me, and speak up when they hear or see things, even if it's around policies and practices at an institution like ACC, and say that's not right, and So it's not always me having to say it. But yeah, someone that will stand with me and speak up and be able to risk it a little bit.
For me, Dr. Barfield, when you talk about, allyship or whatever, and one of the things I want to also speak to is something you mentioned about the women in this movement, who so often get overlooked, because I think there's such an emphasis placed on the men who do the work, and they tend to be the most famous names: the Bobby Seals, the Huey Newtons, the Eldridge Cleavers, whatever, the George Hamptons, George Jackson, I'm sorry, Fred Hampton. These are the names that we tend to hear the most. But then there is Elaine Brown and Kathleen Cleaver, right? Those names, absolutely. And or we talk about people like Assata Shakur, right, who was doing similar kind of work. And all three of those women have books. Elaine Brown's book is A Taste of Power, which is about a Black woman's story and about her in the movement. And what's interesting about this is people like Elaine Brown, like Kathleen Cleaver, were married to these men in the movement, right? And so to get that, and not only holding up that battle, holding up that, bloodstained banner, if you will, themselves, if I may be, cliche and kind of borrow from spirituals and what have you, and really, not only holding that up themselves, but their own personal struggle. Those, some of the things we don't talk about is, and this is something I tell my students, patriarchy knows no racial bound. And so a lot of these women were treated terribly by these men. And some of them were abused by these men, so there was still that structuring, right? That we were dealing with a group of Black men in particular, right, who were being abused, being beaten, if you will, by the system, right? And then they turned around and took it out on the women that were allies, that were working, that were in the trenches, that were doing the work with them. And so those women not only were dealing with that, but they were also dealing, negotiating, or if you will, or navigating the terrain of relationships with these very headstrong, powerful men in this way, and having to temper their own power and temper their own beliefs and temper their own thoughts, in those spaces. And, you get to see, if you have the Criterion channel, the great Agnes Varda did a wonderful documentary about the Black Panthers. It's about 50 minutes long. She pretty much keeps her narrative out of it, and it's told much in the same fashion the Fred Hampton doc is that it's the footage, but you get to hear, she made it a point to record the thoughts and the practices of these women. And so I think even in that regard, like even within the movement, these Black women working as allies with these men becomes very, very important because of all of the things that they have to navigate in addition to just the movement itself, But outside of that, I think what's interesting about allyship as well is that one of the things I'm noticing now that everybody is, oh yeah, I was going to talk about COINTELPRO. I'm glad somebody brought that up. One of the things that I notice now that everybody is aware, I hate the word woke now. I think it's been appropriated in ways now that I'm just like, don't say woke to me. I really, because it's kind of been it's turned into this, it's almost trendy to be woke now. And one of the things that I notice is that, I'll tell you something, and this sounds horrible what I'm about to say, but this is just how I feel, is I'm almost weary of some forms of white allyship, because and when I say weary about it, it's everything that they post, it's all that they talk about, and I have a friend that I say, if you don't have that same level of immediacy that they have about it, then somehow you're not with the movement. And I had to check a friend. So hold on, I've been about this life. Hold on, I came here having to be concerned with those issues. So you appreciate the support, but I've had to pull a few friends back that are white and say, they're like, they need to be fired. I said, why are you doing that? Nobody is asking that of you. That's not allyship, right? And like you said, allyship is sometimes stopping and listening. One of the things that we noticed, I think the question that Chip asked about those white men and those white people in those spaces is that they listen. Yeah. They're quiet because they know, right, their struggle, their privilege, whatever, does not match what is being talked about up there. right? And that's part of it. It's like it's everything you described, Dr. Williams, is you stand up in those moments, you stand behind them, you support, you do the work that needs to be done. But as far as, you know, in asserting your experience, it's not the same thing. It's not the same experience, because, you know, a white male's body or a white man's body is not read the same way my body is read. I don't walk around with a sign on saying that I have a PhD, I'm a professor, I'm really a good guy, don't shoot. It doesn't work that way. You know, so that's why I was saying that we really have to change this understanding about the way we are reading Black and brown bodies, right? It's the same thing we have to do even with people who are Muslim since 9/11. Having to change the way we're reading those bodies, because the information that we're getting about these people is narrow. It's narrow.
Absolutely.
And people are losing their lives because of this narrowness.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that the way I'm dressed now is how I look Monday through Friday, not because I always have to dress up, but because in some respects it's my safe outfit. It's my way to signal to the world that and I shouldn't have to, but that I'm okay, and that you're gonna be okay around me. And I found that from experiences in customer service to law enforcement, when I look like this, it generally goes a little better for me. And it's not fair, but I'm just conscious of that.
Yeah. So another question I ask, you know, to kind of, as we start to kind of move toward the closing hour, I do want to kind of talk about Mr. Fred Hampton saying you can jail a revolutionary, but you can't jail a revolution.
Wow.
So what does that mean in today's pursuit of justice and equality? I'm sorry. You know, how do you define revolutionary then, and what does revolutionary look like now?
Yeah.
You know, how does that look now, revolutionary? Or, you know.
Yeah, I think when I think about that question, Dr. King was assassinated, but his movement lived on and grew stronger. Malcolm X was assassinated. Mandela was in prison for however many years, but came out and made such a powerful impact. And I think everything that happened to them was intentionally about stopping their movement, about questioning their movement, but it did the opposite. And I think now, as I apply it to now, and I think about George Floyd, and you know, people like to say that he had some issues. He didn't have a clean record. He did some bad things. But I think about everything that's come from his death, which shouldn't have to come to that. But we've seen some great progress, and I mean, we have a long way to still go. We've seen things like monuments coming back down. We've seen things like policies and some laws change. We've seen some sports teams rethink their name. We've seen some conversations around the chokehold. We've seen a lot of things coming from that, and I feel like his movement is even stronger now. It took him being taken away from us, but I think revolutionary doesn't have to be perfect, but they can be impactful.
That's a very good point. I love that. The revolution doesn't have to be perfect, but it can be impactful. That's brilliant. I like that. And you know, I think about some of the things that we're fighting against too, in terms of I just saw this comment, I'm sorry, really quick, that Ann made about Pee Wee Reese with Jackie Robinson, which has been pretty much that whole relationship in the movie 42 has been Disneyfied in terms of allyship, because it didn't work that way. Pee Wee Reese didn't put his arm around that didn't happen. It didn't happen like that. That's been very much so sanitized for sure.
Pee Wee Reese told him that you just got to take it. I mean,
he did, but he didn't go out there like in the movie, put his arm around. That's all been done for effect. Right? He told him, well, suck it up. Basically, is what he said. Exactly. But you know, I was thinking about MH. I'm just reading the name that's here, talking about COINTELPRO, which was counterintelligence program, right? And that they were using, right, to kind of surveil, right, you know, people like Hampton, people like Malcolm X, like Martin Luther King, like you mentioned. You know, the fact that, you know, during the period that the Black Panthers were created, that, you know, Ronald Reagan, when he was governor of California at the time, built laws around the idea of cop watching, because you know, the Black Panthers and whatever else were but they were watching the cops. to make sure they're watching their move as a means for survival and protection of self, not because they were trying to do anything to the cop. They were worried about what the cops would do to them. And so that got twisted. And so, you know, and so revolution, I say all that to say that revolution looks more urgent then, because it looks like there was, you know, what they were fighting against seemed more aggressive, more in your face, right over. And now here we're on this end, and you know, a lot of us feel we done made it to the promised land, and and the fight is over and the struggle is no more. But now I think we're dealing with, which is just as dangerous as well, are these microaggressions and these micro insults and these micro, you know, all of these things that happen, these things of like, you know, I'll stand and be an ally with you, but please don't bring your children to my neighborhood, right, to go to school, or don't move in this neighborhood. You know, things like that are happening. And so the revolutionary, you know, it might not have, and I think we've glamorized the revolution, you know, the Black Panthers and that revolution, whatever else, and that the battle and the struggle needs to look, and we've glamorized Tommy Smith and John Carlos standing on, you know, in Mexico in 1968 with the leather gloves in the Olympics, and all of that has been glamorized. And what I think has and defanged a lot in terms of that glamour, because I think what is missing is the struggle, what they sacrificed in order to do that. And I think, you know, that's what I think what is gonna be, that's what's gonna have to be done. There are things that are gonna have to be given up, things that are gonna have to be sacrificed. And you know, in order to make these things happen. It could be job loss, it could be the, you know, and nobody wants to, you know, I understand the fear behind that, but that is what those men and women did. They lost a lot. They you know, because that type of liberation, that freedom, which is a threat to so many. I don't understand how the liberation of an oppressed people can be a threat to the people who are in power, because they feel like there's a loss of power, when in fact they haven't lost anything. But yeah, I think, you know, but yeah, I mean, their sacrifices are going to have to be made. And I guess the thing is like you said, you know, are we willing to do them? Like you say, it doesn't have to be perfect. But yeah, it needs to work for sure. And I think that's some of the things we really definitely need to kind of think about. Like, you know, what are we willing to sacrifice to make sure that, you know, things are a little bit better for the people who come after us, which is what those men and women did.
Yeah, I would think even more recent, Colin Kaepernick, he lost a great deal, but now athletes are able to speak up and kneel or do whatever they want to do to express their feelings because he made that ultimate sacrifice.
We have to have another conversation about Kaepernick.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's do that. Let's do that.
All right. Who I find is very interesting, particularly in terms of the way we talk about socialism and capitalist structures, because I wonder, right, can you work in socialist spaces and still do business in capitalist spaces? Can you ask for this kind of equality for everyone, but still work and do business in capitalist spaces? Can you do that?
Heather said doubtful.
I mean, this is what I'm saying. I mean, I think about Kaepernick, who's done all the things that you said, but you know, quiet deals with the NFL. You know, he's in business with Disney and Netflix. I mean, that's the capitalist of the capitalists.
Okay.
So
I'll take that. I'll take that. I mean, I would argue you still sacrifice some though, but okay. No, I hear you. I think that. Oh, go ahead.
No. I'm just saying this is, and that's not a criticism of him. I'm just wondering, just in general, can that work?
Right. I mean, I think that if people like me and you aren't able to be a part of these organizations and institutions, then there's no way they're going to change. So I don't look for when I'm considering a professional opportunity, I don't look for a perfect organization, but I look for an organization that's willing to say we have some work to do and we're willing to invest in doing that work. And we are going to be honest about the fact that we have some work to do and we need you to be at the table to help us with that. If it's an institution that says, you know, I think we got it done, we got it perfect, and no, we're not going to invest in diversity and equity, or no, we're not going to do that because we don't need it. That's not an organization I can be a part of.
I got you. That makes sense. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, you know, these conversations that we had behind that, as opposed to just saying these things just to be saying them. Do you know what comes behind that. Mitch said, please recognize if you come from a place of a job with benefits. I do. I mean, I'm rarely worked at a place that did not offer that. And of course, right, those are social, people will argue that those are forms of socialism, right? The roads that we use, the highways that we drive, all of those things are a part of those socialist structures. So the idea, right, that there are places in our culture where socialism is in fact at work, but in bigger conversations with healthcare for everyone, the idea that, college for everyone, that kind of, all of that is where people are looking to see that wealth be more evenly disseminated. That kind of thing, I think, is where people are really kind of focusing their conversation. So Dr. Williams, the last question I want to ask you as we move upon up to 8:15 here, the last question I want to ask you is, Fred Hampton once remarked in a speech that when you leave here saying the last words before you go to bed tonight, say, I'm a revolutionary. Make that the last words in case you don't wake up. That the last thing you said, your last words are that I am a revolutionary. And that's so important. The idea of revolution and being a revolutionary was so important. What do you think Fred Hampton's legacy is?
I mean, I think it depends on who you ask and how much they know.
What do you think it is?
Yeah, for me, I would say, so I'm a member of a historically Black fraternity. Huey P. Newton was a member of my fraternity. So I feel in some.
What are you again? What are you?
Sigma, Phi Beta Sigma.
Oh, you're Sigma, okay.
I'm
an alpha, so.
Yeah. So I feel in some respect for us that have had the privilege of higher education, us that are Black and have had the privilege of higher education and know kind of the deeper history. We look at it as a symbol of just as a symbol of not fearing the power structures and not allowing ourselves to be silenced when we are part of these organizations and institutions and pushing for better. And also understanding that we have a responsibility to kind of to even if we don't stay in our community, to reach back into our community and to do the best we can to nurture and uplift the next generation. So that's what it means for me.
Does anybody else have any comments about anything we've discussed here today, or how you see Fred Hampton's legacy? Anything that you noticed in the documentary that stood out to you that you wanted to comment about?
I do.
Yes.
I don't, first of all, about socialism and communism, I think that, and revolution. Revolution to me is change. We all change. Everything changes. And everybody just gathers around. We're into this greed. I can't get enough. Can't get enough. So, changing. You're changing. You're moving. Communism is not the end. That's not what Mark said. Mark said, freedom's the end. Freedom. And that's what the Black Panther was about, freedom. And you get killed if you stand up to the man who doesn't want to give you freedom.
Right.
And we saw that. So, there's a lot of things. I went to school with the EOP, Educational Opportunity Program. I'm a Native American, so I got in on that. Now they have the Pell Grants. Take advantage of that. Use the man. They're out there, but to change, you got to stay true to yourself. You got to look at the freedom the revolution is inside you too. And I feel like these people did the ultimate sacrifice. They gave their lives to be icons and to hold up Black history, Indian history, Native American history, Latinx history, oppressed people everywhere. You see all of a sudden, Mao has a movement, killed a lot of crazy people. They killed bunches of people, and now, they're a communist capitalistic society. They move people around like they don't even belong there. So to me, you got to think relationship, people to people. And I think that's to me what the legacy of Black Panthers were. people doing for people, standing up for people. And I think that this,
Good
I
deal.
think you gentlemen did us right in listening to you. And I hope one of these days we can meet and talk in person. And I want to thank
Thank you.
I want to thank the Conflict Transformation Group for sponsoring this, and Mr. Mark, thank you for sponsoring the film series.
Oh, you're welcome. Appreciate you.
Yeah.
Paula says, I love the way that Fred Hampton defended himself in court. That was such a powerful scene. Also just love the clarity and fearlessness of the language Chairman Fred. Yes, his language. I mean, even he would pepper it with an MF or two here and there. I found that was his favorite. Side probably Chip that latched onto that one.
Right. That's something we can't do though. I can't do that.
The way he did, but he peppered. Yeah, we can't. But it is true. I mean, and it's clear, right, that you know, Fred Hampton clearly in those spaces, right, you see the importance of education to him because he speaks with an erudition, right, that reflects his understanding of his environment, what he's up against, what is everything that's around him. And I think that's why when he was at that table meeting with those guys, that he pushed that as so important, right? Because when you're in the midst of defending yourself, you have to know what you're talking about. Right. You have to know where you're coming from because you have to have every I dotted and every T crossed, because if you don't, right, that's just a means to shut you down. Yeah. And I think that very much so comes clear in the way, even in those mock trials, the way that they practice that and rehearse that, because they knew what the outcome was probably going to be, but they were prepared nonetheless. If only to identify the disparity between what should have happened and what did happen. Absolutely, I agree. Yeah, Paula, I think those things are very powerful indeed. Yeah. Got a couple more minutes. Any other comments? All right. Well, I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us. I've enjoyed this immensely, and I look forward to our future gatherings as we work toward the rest of the series. And so, Shireen, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
I just wanted I thank everybody for coming on behalf of our whole team. We work really hard to make sure that we have a wide range of events to challenge ourselves and our community, but none of it would be worth anything if you all didn't show up. Everything we do particularly for students and then the wider community. So thank you for giving us this time. And we hope to see you at our future films. We have one more film this semester and then 3 in the series in the spring semester. Please join us again.
So can I kind of pitch the next film? Is that cool?
Absolutely, yes.
So the next film we're doing is a movie called Call Her Gonda, which is directed by a graduate of the UT Film School, and he's also now a professor there by the name of PJ Revolve. PJ, I went to film school with PJ, and he has really kind of fashioned his, this wonderful career for himself as a cinematographer and a documentarian. He's a member of the documentary branch of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Oh yeah, so Heather, you know him? Yeah, Dr. Burr. And so I reached out to him and he said, yes, I will have a conversation with you about the film. So we're gonna watch Call Her Gonda and have a conversation with PJ in this December 1st, right, Layla? Is it the 1st? December, if I remember, or am I remembering correctly? It's in December, I know.
You're muted, Layla.
Is it on YouTube? Where do you find it, Dr. Cunningham?
So Ramesh and Layla have constructed this wonderful website that has everything listed on it. So the same link that you use to find out the information about Fred Hampton, the rest of all the films are outlined and what they're about and how to reach all of that information is there. So they did a great job on that website, by the way.
Thank you. I did just drop a link to the website in the chat. Our next screening our next film discussion is on December 1st. And the majority of the rest of the films, not exclusively, they all have a way to be watched for free, which are linked in the individual pages we've created for each film. The next one, we're prompting people to watch on Canopy. And Canopy is a streaming service that's available for free through ACC or the Austin Public Library. And we have information about how to access and sign up for Canopy if you're not already connected with that streaming service on the website.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Dr. Williams, for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Dr.
Thank you
Cunningham,
all.
yeah.
Have a
Have a
very
good
nice
night.
night, everybody.
Stay warm.
Bye-bye.
Bye.